The first step in memorizing anything is to know what it is you are trying to memorize. The unit circle is a circle that is centered at the origin and that has a radius of 1 unit. Wow, I know I would have also never guessed that. The unit circle can be used for many different mathematical concepts like calculating derivatives of trig functions and using integrals to find the area under the curve of a trig function. But more often than not it's just used as a easy way to define sine and cosine functions. Now instead of trying to memorize this entire thing, we can break it up into 4 sections. As we know, a circle is 360 degrees. So this first yellow section is 0 degrees to 90 degrees. Then the next is 90 to 180 degrees. Then 180 to 270 degrees. Then 270 to 360 degrees. But we also have sections in between each of these sections. The first section will be 30 degrees more than our last, and the second and third sections will be 15 degrees apart. So in the first section from 0 degrees to 90 degrees you jump from 0 to 30 degrees. Then from 30 to 45 degrees. Then from 45 to 60 degrees, and then 60 back up to 90 degrees to end off our section. With just memorizing one of these sections we can fill out the entire circle just by changing some of the points into negatives. The first step is to fill out all of the x-coordinates in the yellow section. So we are going to put 3 for the first one, 2 for the second, and 1 for the last one. Then we are going to put a square root over these 3 numbers. Remember, the square root of 1 is equal to 1, so you do not have to put it over 1. Then put all of these values over 2. So 1 over 2 and the square root of 2 over 2 and then the square root of 3 over 2. Now for the y-coordinates we can actually just use the x-coordinates to help us on that. Just look back on our very first x-coordinate point and put that for our very last y-coordinate point. So our third point should be 1 over 2 for the x and square root 3 over 2 for the y-coordinate. Repeating that same step, now we look at the very last x-coordinate point, that being 1 over 2. So we put that very last x-coordinate point into our very first y-coordinate point. Now for all of these middle points they are always going to be square root 2 over 2 for both x and y. They are not always going to be the same sign though. Now for the green section. This section goes from 90 degrees to 180 degrees. Find the sections in between. We add 30 to 90 getting 120 degrees. Then we add 15 getting 135 degrees, then adding 15 again getting 150 degrees. And finally going back up to 180 to end off the section. For the first point in the second section we are going to use the same exact points as the first section. The only change we are going to make is changing the x-coordinate points to negative. So the very last point from section 1 is going to be the very first point in section 2. Except the x-coordinates are negative. And same thing goes for section 3 and 4. In section 3 both the x and y coordinates are negative. And in section 4 only the y coordinates are negative. So now that you have memorized all the points and angles in the unit circle, there is only one thing left to memorize. The radians of the unit circle. Now there are 2 ways of doing this. Either by converting each individual angle into radians or by simply memorizing some numbers. So all you have to remember is that in the first section there is only 1 pi. So we can go ahead and write 1 pi for all of these sections in between. And then we have to remember these 3 numbers. 6, 4, and 3. So we put pi over 6 as our first radian and pi over 4 as our second. And so on. Then for the green section we do 1 less than the denominator. So we can use the same method we did to find the points. But instead of making the radian negative we just subtract 1 from whatever the number is on the denominator and put it as the numerator. So for example the first point in the green section lines up with pi over 3. So we do 3 minus 1 and get 2. So our radian for the first point of this section is 2 pi over 3. Then we repeat that for the next 2 points until we get to the blue section. For the blue section it's the exact same. except we add 1 to the number in the denominator instead of subtracting. So the first point in the third section matches up with the first point in the first section, that being pi over 6. So 6 plus 1 is 7, so it will be 7 pi over 6. Now do that for the last 2 points in that section. Now for your final section it is the same denominators but the numerators are going to be 5, 7, 11. The way I memorize this is by the phrase 5 days a week I go to 7-Eleven. Now we know the last point in the first section will line up with the first point in the last section, that being pi over 3. So we go back to our phrase 5 days a week I go to 7-Eleven and we get 5 pi over 3 as our first radian in our last section. Repeat this for the rest of our points and you have memorized all of the unit circle. So I forgot to tell you about the 4 endpoints. These are really easy to memorize. So assuming everyone watching this video passed pre-algebra, you know what a Cartesian plane is. Remember that the radius of the circle is 1. So this is going to be a circle that goes up to 1 unit. To the right 1, down 1 and left 1. Now to memorize the degrees for these 4 points we just have to go by 90 degrees. So the very top point will be 90 degrees, then 180 degrees and so on. For the radians the rightmost point will either be 0 or 2 pi because as we know from geometry, the circumference of a circle with the radius of 1 is 2 pi. So 2 pi would signify a full revolution being completed. Now for the top point of the circle this is going to be pi over 2 because it is 1/4 of the way to being complete. Then the leftmost point will be pi, because pi is exactly half of 2 pi and the leftmost point of the unit circle is halfway to a full revolution. Then the next point is 3 pi over 2 for the same reasons and the final point is 4 pi over 2 which simplifies to 2 pi. So I know I went a little fast in this video, so if you still need help or are stuck with something let me know in the comments and I will try my best to help you. Remember that remembering the unit circle is very important because it never goes away.